Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a pretty hard truth in public health. Did you know your zip code is often a better predictor of your life expectancy than your actual genetic code? It's wild, but true. We know health outcomes are heavily skewed by socioeconomic position, but how exactly does that happen? Like, how does poverty literally get under our skin? Okay, let's dive into this and explore the fascinating evidence connecting our economic reality to our physical health.
Now, when we talk about health disparities, we usually hear the exact same, very familiar narrative, right? People just need to make better lifestyle choices. We almost always default to behavioral explanations. We think poor health comes down to a bad diet, psychological stress, or just a lack of personal responsibility. But what if we challenge that idea entirely? Public health data is actually forcing a massive paradigm shift right now. We have to ask ourselves, what if the root cause of widespread illness isn't hiding in bad individual choices at all, but somewhere else entirely?
And that brings us to the core concept of today's explainer, the materialistic pathway. This is a foundational model in epidemiology asserting that our health and the diseases we get are fundamentally driven by unequal access to physical and economic resources. It completely shifts the blame away from the individual and places it squarely onto the environment. Basically, it shows that poverty directly exposes people to hazardous conditions. We're talking substandard housing, occupational risks, and nutritional deficits. The data points us straight toward these physical realities rather than just moral failings or stress.
So here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, hazards in the home. Second, the danger of work. Third, the high cost of eating. And finally, fixing the structural foundation. We're going to examine the evidence hiding in the physical spaces where we spend our lives, our homes, our workplaces, and right on our dinner plates.
Section 1. Hazards in the home. Let's make our first stop on this spatial tour and look at the built environment. Researchers use area-based deprivation indexes to map exactly where disease happens. And wow, when you compare high-income and low-income environments side by side, the physical contrast is just undeniable. High-income areas generally give you clean ventilation, plenty of space, and easy access to fresh produce. But low-income populations, they are disproportionately concentrated in substandard housing. We're talking about structural deficiencies you can literally see and feel, things like overcrowding, severe structural disrepair, and chronic dampness. The materialistic pathway operates right here, in the very walls and the air of these physical spaces. And these structural deficiencies have direct, measurable health consequences. Epidemiological studies draw a straight line from housing conditions right to severe respiratory issues. When a home has chronic dampness and poor ventilation, the people living there face highly elevated risks for conditions like asthma and COPD, that's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Plus, structural disrepair in economically depressed areas is linked directly to higher rates of vector-borne infections. So the physical structure of a home essentially dictates the local illness rates.
But the hazards definitely don't stop at the front door. The commercial infrastructure immediately outside the home plays a massive role too. You've probably heard the term food desert, right? Well, spatial epidemiology also points to something called a food swamp. This is an environment where trying to find a fresh apple is incredibly difficult, but the neon marketing for energy-dense, ultra-processed food, that is completely unavoidable. These localized physical conditions dictate what people can actually buy, which directly impacts the health of the whole community.
Section 2. The danger of work. Let's move to the workplace and see how this builds.
Employment conditions are another massive material conduit where poverty directly influences our health. Social epidemiology shows us a really stark occupational gradient here. If you look at occupational health surveillance, low-income workers are hugely overrepresented in high-risk sectors. We're talking construction, agriculture, manufacturing, and sanitation. Because of this, individuals in lower status jobs face a significantly higher cumulative exposure to physical and chemical hazards compared to folks in higher socioeconomic brackets. So what exactly are these workers facing every single day? Well, they're dealing with severe structural material deficits. This means a lack of adequate safety equipment, constant exposure to toxic particulates and known carcinogens, and having to work through extreme temperature variations. And let's not forget, the purely physical nature of these jobs involves movements that induce serious musculoskeletal strain. These are completely unavoidable structural hazards. These workers literally cannot escape them while just trying to perform their daily labor to survive. This creates what is basically an inescapable pipeline of occupational morbidity. Step 1. It almost always starts with precarious employment contracts which frequently go hand in hand with poverty.
Then, because of sheer economic necessity, these workers have an absolute inability to alter their labor conditions or demand safer environments. They just can't risk speaking up. Consequently, epidemiological analyses show a direct path to higher incidences of traumatic workplace injuries, chronic pain syndromes, and cumulative physical trauma.
Section 3. The high cost of eating. Now, let's arrive at our final stop on this tour, the kitchen, and look at nutritional epidemiology.
Nutritional epidemiology establishes some incredibly clear links between our household income, our purchasing power, and our eventual health outcomes. But very simply, poverty directly limits the financial resources you have to actually acquire a balanced diet. This results in household food insecurity, and it is so absolutely crucial to understand this point. Dietary limitations here are a direct economic response to budgetary constraints. It is not some form of individual behavioral deviance or just a lack of willpower.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the brutal economic logic it reveals. When you look at national nutrition data, high-income dietary patterns can afford to prioritize essential micronutrients and lean protein. Why? Because their economic goal is maximizing nutritional quality per dollar. But low-income populations, they are forced to rely heavily on refined carbs and cheap, energy-dense foods. The driving economic goal here is basic survival, maximizing calories per dollar, entirely at the expense of nutritional quality.
And the population-level data makes this crystal clear, linking these specific material dietary constraints directly to severe chronic conditions. We see dramatic, undeniable spikes in obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases within low-income communities. Again, the mechanism operating here is rooted entirely in the harsh economic constraints on food access. The way disease is distributed across our society is quite literally physically shaped by our wallets.
Section 4. Fixing the structural foundation. Let's look at how we must reframe our interventions based on all this data.
The epidemiological data demands a major shift in how we execute public health planning. For way too long, there's been this heavy focus on the individual, right? Lecturing people on downstream behavioral modifications, basically telling them to simply eat better or stress less. But the evidence loudly suggests a structural focus is far more effective. If we actually want to move the needle on population health, interventions need to address the fundamental drivers of material risk. We're talking about real housing reform, strict occupational safety enforcement, and economic redistribution.
As researchers so perfectly summarize it, quote, recognizing poverty as a fundamental driver of material risk allows public health researchers to target structural interventions rather than focusing exclusively on downstream individual-level behavioral modifications. To achieve true health equality, the data shows us we have to stop just treating the symptoms. We need to start tackling the structural causes of the causes. So I want to leave you with a thought to carry with you today. The next time you walk out your front door, take a critical look around. How is your own community, your local built environment, the businesses, the housing, structurally designed to either support or harm your health? Once you understand the materialistic pathway, it kind of changes how you view the spaces around you forever, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.